I received an urgent call from my bank manager, Derek, who said someone had opened multiple accounts using my identity and social security number. The manager's voice was tense, professional but concerned. He said I needed to come to the bank immediately because this wasn't a random stranger but a family member. When I arrived and Derek showed me the signature on the documents, my blood ran cold. The handwriting was unmistakably similar to my own, but the middle initial was different. Then Derek revealed the account holder's listed address, and I recognized it instantly. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I sat across from Derek in his cramped office at the bank. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh clinical glow that made the papers on his desk look even more incriminating. Derek slid 3 separate account statements across the table toward me, his expression grave. Each one bore my name, my social security number, and signatures that looked disturbingly close to my own handwriting. 3 different accounts, he explained carefully, had been opened over the past 6 months. The total amount withdrawn came to $73,000. $73,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I had worked 37 years as a high school history teacher before retiring, and I had saved carefully, lived modestly. This was a significant chunk of what I had left. Derek explained the mechanics of how it had happened. Someone had forged my signature, used my social security number, and even provided a fake identification card with my information on it. The banks, he said apologetically, had no reason to suspect fraud because everything appeared legitimate. The accounts had been opened in person at different branches, the signatures matched closely enough to pass initial scrutiny, and the person had answered security questions correctly. That last detail made my stomach drop. How could someone answer my security questions? Then Derek pointed to the address listed on the account applications, and everything clicked into a horrifying picture. The address was my son Marcus's house, the 2-story colonial on Maple Street, where Marcus lived with his wife Dana and their 2 children, my grandchildren Emma and Tyler. My mind immediately began racing backward through the past 6 months, searching for clues I had missed. I remembered Dana asking to borrow my wallet briefly when I visited for Tyler's 8th birthday party in April. She had said she needed to check my insurance card because she was comparing providers for their family plan. I had handed it over without a second thought. Why would I suspect my own daughter-in-law? Then, there was the day in May, when Dana had insisted on helping me set up online banking. She had been so patient, so attentive, sitting beside me at my kitchen table and walking me through every step. She had said it would make my life so much easier that I could check my accounts any time without driving to the bank. I remembered how she had typed in my information, how she had helped me choose security questions. I had been grateful for her help. I had thought she was being kind. Derek spread out transaction records in front of me like he was dealing cards. Each statement told a story of systematic theft. The money had been withdrawn in small increments, never enough to trigger automatic fraud alerts. $500 here, $800 there, occasionally $1,000. The withdrawals had been used at luxury stores I had never heard of, high-end restaurants in the city, and a travel agency called Destinations Unlimited. I felt physically sick. My son Marcus worked brutal hours as a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at County General Hospital. He often pulled double shifts, sometimes working 16 or 18 hours straight. He came home exhausted, barely able to keep his eyes open through dinner with his kids. He was doing everything he could to provide for his family. And all this time, this was happening under his own roof. I asked Derek not to call the police yet. The words came out harder than I intended. He looked surprised, then concerned. He leaned forward and explained that the bank had protocols, that fraud of this magnitude required law enforcement involvement, that waiting could complicate recovery efforts. But I insisted. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before we involved the authorities. I needed to know if my son was somehow involved, though my heart refused to believe it. I needed to protect Marcus if I could. Derek was reluctant, clearly uncomfortable with the delay, but he finally agreed to give me 72 hours before the bank would be required to file a mandatory fraud report, 3 days. That was all I had to figure this out. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text message from Dana that had been sent 2 hours earlier, right around the time Derek had first called me. The message was casual, friendly, completely normal. It asked if I could babysit tomorrow afternoon, because she had a doctor's appointment, and Marcus was working a double shift. She added a smiley face emoji at the end. The casualness of it, the absolute normalcy of her deception, made my stomach turn. She had no idea I was sitting in a bank office looking at evidence of her crimes. She was already planning her next move, already setting up her next alibi, treating me like I was just a convenient tool for whatever she needed. I walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. Everything looked the same, the traffic moving normally on Main Street, people walking their dogs, kids riding bikes, but nothing felt real anymore. Someone I had welcomed into my family, someone I had trusted with my grandchildren, someone I had helped and supported for 12 years, had been systematically robbing me blind. The next morning, I drove to Marcus's house but parked 3 houses down the street, tucked between a utility van and an overgrown hedge. I felt ridiculous, like some character in a bad television movie, but I needed to see what Dana did when she thought no one was watching. I had brought my binoculars, the good Nikon ones I used for bird watching at the lake. Now I was using them to watch my daughter-in-law. At 9:30, Dana emerged from the front door. She was dressed in a way that immediately struck me as wrong for a doctor's appointment. She wore a tailored navy dress that I had never seen before, expensive-looking heels, and carried a designer handbag. Her hair was styled elaborately, and even from this distance, I could see she was wearing more makeup than usual. This was not the outfit of someone expecting to sit in a medical waiting room. I followed her at a careful distance as she drove her silver SUV out of the neighborhood. My heart pounded the entire time. I had never followed anyone before in my life. Dana headed toward the upscale shopping district on the north side of town, the area with boutiques that displayed prices only if you asked, the kind of stores I had never set foot in during my entire working life. She parked in front of a cafe called The Meridian. I parked across the street, slouching down in my seat like some kind of amateur detective. Through my binoculars, I watched her check her appearance in her rearview mirror, reapply lipstick, and then walk into the cafe with the confidence of someone who belonged there. 10 minutes later, a man arrived. He was younger than Dana, maybe 35 or 36, with the kind of artificial tan and carefully styled hair that spoke of someone who spent considerable time and money on his appearance. He wore designer jeans and a fitted black polo shirt that showed off an athletic build. He looked like he had walked out of a fitness magazine. I watched them through the cafe window. They greeted each other not like acquaintances but like intimate friends. They hugged longer than appropriate. When they sat down, they chose seats on the same side of the table instead of across from each other. They laughed constantly. At one point, Dana reached across and touched his hand, letting her fingers linger. After about 45 minutes, they left the cafe together. The man was carrying a shopping bag from a jewelry store called Castellano's. I knew the place by reputation only. It was where people bought engagement rings that cost more than used cars. He handed the bag to Dana casually, like it was nothing, like giving expensive jewelry to someone else's wife was just a normal Tuesday morning activity. I followed them to a luxury apartment complex called the Towers at Riverside. It was one of those newer developments with a doorman, covered parking, and probably monthly rents higher than my mortgage payment. They parked and went inside together, walking close, his hand on the small of her back in a way that made their relationship crystal clear. I waited. 3 hours I sat in that parking lot, listening to talk radio and drinking cold coffee from a thermos, watching the entrance to that building. When they finally emerged, they had both changed clothes. Dana now wore jeans and a casual sweater. The man wore athletic gear like he was heading to or from a workout. They stood by her car for several minutes, talking, laughing. Then he leaned in and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, but a long, intimate kiss that left no doubt about what had happened in that apartment. My heart broke, but not for myself. It broke for Marcus, my son, who worked himself to exhaustion, who missed baseball games and school plays because he was saving lives at the hospital, who believed his wife was home raising their children and managing their household. Marcus had no idea that his wife was living a completely different life, funded by money stolen from his own father. That evening, I drove to Calvin's house. Calvin Porter had been my best friend since we were both 22 years old, teaching at the same school. He had retired from teaching 15 years ago and had a second career as a police detective before retiring again 5 years back. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it was Calvin. I showed him everything. The bank statements, The photos I had taken on my phone of Dana and the man, the timeline of events. Calvin listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing increasingly serious. When I finished, he sat back in his leather recliner and let out a long breath. He told me this was worse than I thought. This wasn't just a daughter-in-law with a shopping problem or even a simple case of identity theft. This was systematic, planned, organized fraud. Dana had clearly been working on this for months, maybe longer. She had gained access to my personal information, forged documents, and created an entirely false financial identity in my name. This took planning, knowledge, and a complete lack of conscience. Calvin still had contacts in the police department. He made some calls, cashed in old favors. Within 2 hours, he had information that made everything even worse. He had run the license plate of the man Dana was meeting. His name was Trevor Hastings. He was 37 years old, a personal trainer at an exclusive gym downtown. But more importantly, Trevor had a history. 2 previous girlfriends had filed restraining orders against him. One had accused him of financial manipulation. There was a pattern here, Calvin explained. Trevor targeted women with access to money, cultivated relationships, and then systematically helped them steal from their families. But Calvin had found something else. Something he saved for last. He pulled up records from a different bank, one I did not even use. Using his law enforcement contacts, he had discovered a 4th account that I did not know existed. This one was not at my regular bank, which was why Derek had not found it. This account was at First National, opened 2 months ago, and it contained $112,000. $112,000. The money had come from a personal loan taken out against my home equity. Someone, using my forged signature and stolen identity, had borrowed against my house. The house I had paid off after 30 years. The house my late wife, Sarah, and I had raised Marcus in. The house that was supposed to be my security, my legacy for my son and grandchildren. I could not breathe for a moment. The scope of the theft was so much larger than I had imagined. Dana had not just stolen from my savings. She had mortgaged my entire future. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those account statements, those photos of Dana with Trevor, that casual kiss in the parking lot. But by morning, I had a plan. Calvin helped me refine it. We needed evidence that would hold up in court. Evidence that would protect Marcus from any suspicion of involvement. Evidence that would ensure Dana faced the full consequences of what she had done. I called Dana from my landline at 8 in the morning. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cheerful and warm. She called me Dad, the way she had for 12 years. I pushed down the anger that rose in my throat and kept my voice steady, friendly. I told her I had been thinking about estate planning, about updating my will, and I wanted to make sure she and the grandchildren were taken care of properly. Would she have time to come over this afternoon to discuss it? There was the briefest pause, so brief I might have imagined it, before Dana responded with enthusiasm. She said that was so thoughtful of me, that of course she would come by, that she really appreciated me thinking of the family's future. She suggested 2 o'clock, if that worked for me. I said it was perfect. After I hung up, Calvin arrived with equipment. In our state, single-party consent laws meant I could legally record conversations in my own home as long as I was part of them. Calvin set up a small digital recorder in my living room, hidden inside an old radio on the bookshelf. He tested it twice to make sure it would pick up voices clearly from anywhere in the room. At exactly 2 o'clock, Dana's SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched her check her appearance in the mirror before getting out, the same way she had before meeting Trevor. She walked up to my front door, carrying a small gift bag. When I opened the door, she hugged me warmly and handed me the bag. Inside was a tin of butter cookies from an expensive bakery downtown. She settled onto my couch, crossing her legs and smiling at me with what appeared to be genuine affection. I offered her tea, which she accepted. As I prepared it in the kitchen, I could hear her moving around the living room, probably looking at family photos on the mantel. The photos of her wedding to Marcus, of the grandchildren at various ages, of all of us together at Christmas and birthdays and summer barbecues, a record of 12 years of family life that had apparently meant nothing to her. I brought the tea in on a tray and sat down in my armchair across from her. I started gently, asking about her life, about whether she was happy, whether she felt fulfilled. Dana talked easily about the challenges of raising children, about how busy Marcus was with work, about her volunteer activities at the kids' school. She was relaxed, comfortable, performing the role of devoted wife and mother with practiced ease. Then I shifted the conversation. I mentioned casually that I had been having some trouble with my bank accounts. I watched her face carefully as I said it. There was a flicker of something, a micro-expression that crossed her features so quickly I almost missed it. Her eyes widened slightly. Her smile froze for just a fraction of a second, before she recovered and asked what kind of trouble. I explained that the bank had found some irregularities, and they were conducting an investigation. I said I was sure it was probably just a mistake, some kind of computer error, but they were being very thorough about checking everything. I mentioned that they had asked me about when my personal information might have been compromised, whether anyone had borrowed my wallet or had access to my documents. Dana's performance was remarkable. She expressed concern, asked if I thought someone had stolen my identity, suggested I should be more careful about where I kept important papers. But I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She was trying to determine how much I knew, whether I suspected anything specific, whether this was a real threat or just an unfortunate coincidence. I brought up the wallet incident from Tyler's birthday party. I said the bank had asked me to try to remember any time someone might have had access to my personal information, and I recalled her borrowing my wallet that day. I phrased it carefully, like I was just trying to help the bank's investigation, not accusing her of anything. Dana laughed it off. She said she barely looked at the wallet, just glanced at my insurance card for 2 seconds. She said there was no way anyone could have gotten information from that. Then she pivoted, changing the subject to talk about how stressed Marcus had been lately, how they had been struggling financially, how expensive it was to raise children these days. She mentioned that Tyler needed braces soon, that Emma wanted to take dance classes, that their property taxes had gone up. She was building a narrative, I realized. She was establishing financial need, creating sympathy, laying groundwork. But for what? Then she did something I was not expecting. Dana started crying. The tears came suddenly, dramatically. She put her face in her hands and her shoulders shook. She said she had to confess something, that it had been eating at her, that she could not keep it secret anymore. She looked up at me with red eyes and told me she had opened an account in my name, but the confession she gave me was a lie. She said it was just one account, opened 6 months ago, with only $5,000 in it. She said Marcus's car had broken down and they could not afford the repairs. She said they were behind on bills, and she was desperate. She said she knew it was wrong, that she had been planning to tell me and pay me back, that she never meant for it to become a big problem. She begged me not to tell Marcus. She said he was too proud, that it would destroy him to know she had done this. She said he worked so hard and sacrificed so much, and she could not bear for him to feel like a failure as a provider. She promised she would pay back every penny, that she would get a job, that she would make it right. The performance was almost believable. If I had not seen the bank statements, if I did not know about Trevor, if Calvin had not found the 4th account, I might have believed her. I might have thought she had made one desperate mistake born out of love for her family. But I knew the truth. She was not confessing out of guilt. She was trying to control the narrative, to minimize the crime, to manipulate me into staying quiet. She was confessing to stealing $5,000 to cover up the theft of nearly $200,000. She was betting that my love for Marcus and the grandchildren would make me want to keep this quiet, to handle it privately within the family. I looked at Dana, sitting on my couch, tears streaming down her face, and I saw her clearly for the first time. Not as my daughter-in-law, not as the mother of my grandchildren, but as a calculating criminal who had targeted my family with precision and patience. She had married into access, gained trust over years, and then exploited that trust without mercy. I told her I understood, that I forgave her, that I did not want Marcus to know either. I said we should discuss a repayment plan, something manageable, that would not put too much strain on their family. I asked if she could come back tomorrow so we could work out the details together. Dana's relief was visible. She hugged me tightly, thanked me for being understanding, called me the best father-in-law anyone could ask for. She said she would come back tomorrow afternoon, same time. She practically floated out of my house, probably thinking she had dodged disaster, that she had successfully manipulated an old man into covering up her crime. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, listening to the recording Calvin and I had just captured. Her voice came through clearly. Every word of her calculated confession preserved digitally. But it was not enough. We needed more. That evening, I called Marcus. I asked him to come over alone, without Dana, without the kids. I told him it was important, that I needed to talk to him about something serious. I could hear the concern in his voice when he agreed to come by after his shift ended at 11. Marcus arrived at my house at 11:45, still wearing his scrubs. He looked exhausted, in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. There were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too many consecutive shifts, too many emergencies, too many patients who did not make it despite his best efforts. His scrubs were wrinkled, and there was a coffee stain on the sleeve. He mentioned he had just finished a 16-hour shift in the ICU and had 3 patients coding during the last 4 hours alone. I made him sit down. I made him a sandwich because I knew he probably had not eaten a real meal all day. Then, while he ate mechanically, I told him everything. I showed him the bank statements first. I watched his face as he read through them, watched confusion turn to disbelief. He kept saying there must be some mistake, that someone must have stolen my identity, that we needed to call the police. He did not understand yet. He could not imagine what was coming. Then I showed him the photos on my phone. Dana and Trevor at the cafe. Dana and Trevor going into the apartment building. Dana and Trevor kissing in the parking lot. Marcus stared at the images like he was trying to decipher a foreign language. His sandwich sat forgotten on the plate. I played him the recording from that afternoon. We sat in silence as Dana's voice filled the room. Her fake confession, her manipulation, her calculated tears. When it ended, Marcus still had not spoken. He just sat there, frozen. Then I told him about the 4th account, about the loan against my house, about the $112,000. I told him about Trevor Hastings's background, about the pattern of targeting women with access to money. Marcus broke. He did not cry immediately. First came denial. He said this could not be real, that there had to be another explanation. Maybe someone was framing Dana. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe the photos were not what they looked like. He was grasping, desperately trying to find a version of reality where his wife had not betrayed him, had not stolen from his father, had not been living a double life. But then the denial cracked, and anger rushed in. He stood up suddenly, knocking over his chair. He paced my living room with his hands in his hair, breathing hard. He said he had been working doubles and triples for the past year, because Dana told him they needed money. She had said Emma's private school tuition was expensive, that her mother needed help with medical bills, that they were behind on their mortgage payment. He had believed every word. He had sacrificed time with his children, had missed soccer games and school plays and bedtime stories, all so he could work more hours and bring home more money for his family. Then the anger dissolved into devastation. Marcus sat back down and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. My strong son, who had chosen one of the most demanding professions in the world, who had held dying patients' hands and comforted grieving families, who had seen every kind of human suffering, was breaking apart in my living room. I sat beside him. I did not say anything for a long time. There was nothing to say that would make this hurt less. Eventually, Marcus went home. I urged him to take copies of everything, to not confront Dana yet, to wait until we had a full plan. But I worried about what he might do, what he might say. I called him at 2 a.m. to make sure he was okay. He did not answer. The next morning, Marcus showed up at my door at 6. He had not slept. He looked like a ghost. But he had something with him, a folder full of papers, and a second cell phone. He had spent the night going through everything. Dana had been controlling all their household finances, he explained. She managed the bank accounts, paid the bills, handled the budgets. Marcus just deposited his paychecks and trusted that she was taking care of everything. He had never had reason to doubt her, but last night, he had gone through their financial records carefully. He found discrepancies everywhere. Dana had been telling him their mortgage payment was $2,200 a month. The actual payment was $1,600. She had been telling him the electric bill averaged $300. It averaged $175. She had been telling him they were paying $800 a month for Emma's private school. Emma was not enrolled in private school. She attended the same public elementary school Tyler did. Dana had been systematically inflating every expense and pocketing the difference for years. Marcus had also found a second phone hidden in Dana's nightstand drawer, tucked under some old magazines. It was a cheap prepaid smartphone, the kind people use when they do not want calls traced or linked to their regular number. Marcus had gone through it. The text messages between Dana and Trevor went back almost 2 years. 2 years of planning, scheming, discussing strategy. There were messages about which of my accounts to target first, about how long fraud investigations typically took, about what they would do with the money once they had enough. There were messages about their future together. Dana and Trevor had been planning to leave. They were going to wait until Dana had secured enough money, then disappear together. Trevor had researched places with no extradition treaties, had looked into buying property overseas, had mapped out a whole exit strategy. But the worst messages were the ones about Marcus. I watched my son read them, watched each word hit him like a physical blow. Dana had written that Marcus was too boring and broke to satisfy her anymore. She said he was a good father but a terrible husband, that he was never home, that she deserved better than a nurse who worked all the time and never took her anywhere exciting. She said Trevor made her feel alive, in ways Marcus never could. She said she had married Marcus thinking he would become a doctor and make real money, and she was tired of waiting for a better life that was never going to come. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Marcus had been working himself to exhaustion for his family, and his wife had been mocking him for it, resenting him for not making more money, while she stole nearly $200,000 from his father. Marcus sat at my kitchen table reading those messages over and over, like he was trying to make sense of words in a language he did not speak. He kept saying he did not understand. They had seemed happy. They still had date nights once a month. They still said they loved each other. How had he missed this? I told him what I wished someone had told me years ago, when I went through my own betrayal in a business partnership that nearly cost me everything. I told him that some people are very good at deception. They learn to mimic emotion, to perform love, to make you believe in a reality that does not exist. It is not his fault that he believed his wife. Trust is supposed to be the foundation of marriage. The failure was hers, not his, but I could see he did not believe me yet. He blamed himself. He said he should have been home more, should have paid more attention, should have seen the signs. I knew that guilt would take time to process, time to heal from. We called Calvin. The three of us sat together and planned our next move. We had evidence now, concrete proof of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. But we needed to ensure Trevor was also arrested and charged. We needed to make sure both of them faced full consequences. Calvin called his former partner, Detective Sarah Torres. She was now a senior investigator in the Financial Crimes Unit. Calvin explained the situation, and Sarah agreed to help. She would be present tomorrow when Dana came over, hidden and listening. She would hear Dana incriminate herself further. Then they would both be arrested. Marcus asked if he had to be there. I told him no, but Sarah suggested he should be. She said it would help the case to have him witness his wife's confession, and it might help him emotionally to hear the truth directly from Dana, instead of always wondering. Marcus agreed, though I could see it was tearing him apart. The next morning, Detective Sarah Torres arrived at my house at noon, 2 hours before Dana was scheduled to come. She was a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes, and the kind of calm professional demeanor that came from 25 years in law enforcement. She and Calvin had worked together for a decade before they both retired, and the easy familiarity between them was obvious. Sarah set up additional recording equipment, more sophisticated than what Calvin had used before. She explained the legal requirements, made sure I understood that everything we were doing was by the book. She wanted this case to be airtight. She positioned herself in my spare bedroom, the one with a view into the living room through a partially open door. She could see and hear everything from there. Marcus arrived at 1:30. He looked somehow worse than yesterday, if that was possible. His hands were shaking. I made him coffee, strong and black the way he liked it. We sat together waiting, not talking much. What was there to say? At exactly 2 o'clock, Dana arrived. She came through the door with the same bright energy as yesterday, hugged me, asked how I was sleeping, said she had been thinking about our conversation, and she had a plan for paying me back that she wanted to discuss. She was so confident, so sure she had control of the situation. We sat down in the same positions as yesterday. I told Dana that I had been thinking about her situation overnight. I said I understood that she and Marcus were struggling, and I wanted to help more substantially. I told her I was considering giving her $50,000 outright as a gift, not a loan, so she would not have to worry about paying it back while they were already under financial stress. I watched greed flicker across Dana's face. She tried to hide it, tried to look grateful and reluctant, but I saw it. She said that was too generous, that she could not possibly accept that much, but her protests were weak and automatic. She wanted that money. I pressed forward. I said that before I gave her such a large amount, I needed to understand the full situation. I needed to know exactly where the money she had already taken had gone. I needed to understand their financial picture so I could help appropriately. Dana started talking. She began explaining away the luxury store purchases as necessities for the children. She said Emma needed new clothes for school because she was growing so fast. She said Tyler needed sports equipment for his baseball team. She said she had to buy groceries at expensive stores because Tyler had food allergies that required special products. Sarah had coached me on what questions to ask, what transaction to bring up. I mentioned a specific purchase at a jewelry store, $3,200 in July. Dana stumbled over her explanation. She said it was a watch for Marcus's birthday. But Marcus's birthday was in March, I pointed out. She quickly corrected herself, said it was an anniversary gift. I asked when their anniversary was. She got the date wrong by 2 months. I brought up the charges at Destinations Unlimited, the travel agency. Over $18,000 across 4 different bookings. Dana said she had been planning a surprise trip for the family, but then it had not worked out, and she had gotten refunds. I asked for the refund documentation. She said she would have to look for it. With each question, Dana's story became more tangled. She contradicted herself, forgot what lies she had told, got details wrong. I could see frustration building in her. She was not used to being questioned. Marcus had always trusted her completely, and she had gotten comfortable with that blind trust. Then I asked the question Sarah had specifically told me to ask. I said I wanted to make sure Marcus knew about all of this before I gave her more money. I said I did not want to put her in a position where she had to keep secrets from her husband. Dana's demeanor changed instantly. Her face hardened. The mask of the apologetic, desperate wife slipped, and I saw something cold underneath. She said Marcus did not need to know. She said Marcus would not understand. Then she laughed, and it was not a nice sound. She said Marcus did not notice anything anyway. He was always at the hospital, always working, always too tired to pay attention to what was happening in his own home. I pushed a little more. I asked if their marriage was okay, if she was happy. That was when she really started talking. Dana said she had been miserable for years. She said she had married Marcus thinking he was going to be a doctor, that he was going to make real money, that they were going to have the kind of life she deserved. But he had stayed a nurse, content with his modest salary and his exhausting schedule. She said she had given him the best years of her life. And what did she have to show for it? A middle-class house in a boring suburb and a husband who was never home. She said she had met someone who actually appreciated her. Someone who took her to nice restaurants and bought her jewelry and made her feel special. She said his name was Trevor, and I would probably like him better than Marcus. She said Trevor understood that she deserved luxury, that she deserved to be pampered, that she deserved more than what Marcus could provide. She was planning to leave Marcus anyway, she said. Soon, she had been planning it for a while. This money, my money that she had stolen, was going to help her start fresh with Trevor. They were going to move somewhere warm, somewhere expensive, somewhere people like Marcus could never afford to go. The cruelty in her voice was stunning. This was not desperation or poor judgment. This was calculated malice. She had targeted my family deliberately, stolen systematically, and was now mocking my son's dedication and sacrifice. In the bedroom, I knew Marcus was listening to every word. I knew this was destroying him. But Sarah had been right. He needed to hear this. He needed to know exactly who he had been married to. Then Detective Sarah Torres walked into the living room. Dana's face went completely white. She stood up so fast she knocked over her teacup, sending liquid spreading across my coffee table. Her eyes darted between me and Sarah, her mind clearly racing to understand what was happening, how much trouble she was in. Sarah identified herself calmly, showed her badge, and began explaining that she had heard everything Dana had just said. She said it corroborated extensive documented evidence of identity theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Dana immediately switched tactics. She said she had been joking. She said I had misunderstood her. She said this was entrapment, that I had manipulated her into saying things that were not true. She said she wanted a lawyer. Her voice was rising, becoming shrill with panic. Then Marcus stepped out from the bedroom. The look on Dana's face went through a rapid evolution. First, shock that he was there. Then panic, as she realized he had heard everything. Then a desperate calculation, as she tried to figure out how to spin this. She ran toward him with her arms outstretched, tears already forming. She started saying she did not mean any of it, that she was confused, that she loved him, that she would never leave him. She reached for him, tried to embrace him. Marcus stepped back. His face was completely expressionless, and somehow that was more terrible than if he had been crying or yelling. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady and cold in a way I had never heard from my son before. He said he had heard everything. He said he had seen the messages on her phone, the ones about how boring and broke he was, the ones about how she had married him, expecting him to become something he never promised to be. He said he knew about Trevor, about the apartment, about all of it. He told her their marriage was over. Dana's performance shifted again. The tears stopped. The desperate pleading stopped. What replaced it was ugly. She started yelling that this was his fault, that if he had made more money she would not have had to do this, that if he had been home more and paid attention to her she would not have looked elsewhere. She said he was a failure as a husband, and she had every right to find happiness somewhere else. Sarah let her rant. Every word Dana spoke was being recorded, more evidence of her complete lack of remorse, her narcissism, her willingness to blame everyone but herself. Then Sarah arrested her. She read Dana her rights while putting handcuffs on her wrists. Dana was still yelling, threatening to sue all of us, claiming we had trapped her, saying her lawyer would destroy our case. Sarah called for backup. 2 uniformed officers arrived and took Dana to the police station. As they led her out of my house in handcuffs, she was screaming that she had done nothing wrong, that Marcus had driven her to this, that I was a senile old man who did not understand anything. After she was gone, the house felt very quiet. Sarah sat down with Marcus and me and explained what would happen next. She already had a warrant being processed for Trevor Hastings' arrest. The evidence from Dana's phone, combined with the financial records and witness statements, was more than enough to charge him as an accomplice. Within 3 hours, Trevor was arrested at the apartment Jed had photographed days earlier. He tried to claim he knew nothing about where Dana was getting money, but his text messages told a different story. He had been actively involved in planning the fraud, had encouraged Dana to take more, and had helped research how to avoid detection. Both Dana and Trevor were charged with multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and theft over $100,000. Sarah said they were looking at serious prison time if convicted, potentially 8 to 12 years each. The next few weeks were brutal for Marcus. He filed for divorce immediately and petitioned for emergency custody of Emma and Tyler. Dana's lawyer tried to argue that she was a good mother and deserved shared custody, but the evidence of her crimes, combined with her complete absence of remorse, worked against her. The court was particularly disturbed when it came out that Dana had frequently left the children with strangers while she met Trevor. She had hired unreliable babysitters from apps, people she had not vetted, so she could spend afternoons at the apartment. Several times the babysitters had not shown up, and the children, then 6 and 8 years old, had been left alone for hours after school. Marcus was granted full custody. Dana was allowed supervised visitation twice a month, but she had to complete it at a family court facility with a social worker present. Emma and Tyler were confused and hurt. They did not understand why their mother was suddenly gone, why they were not living in their house anymore, why everything had changed. Marcus moved them into a short-term rental closer to my house while he figured out longer-term plans. The children asked questions. They asked where their mother was, why she could not come home, whether they had done something wrong. Marcus and I answered as honestly as we could without overwhelming them with adult problems. We said their mother had made some very serious mistakes and had to face consequences, but that none of it was their fault, and both Marcus and I loved them very much. The bank froze all the fraudulent accounts. The process of recovering the money was complicated, involving multiple financial institutions and law enforcement agencies. But because I had reported the fraud immediately and had cooperated fully with the investigation, and because Dana and Trevor were facing criminal charges, things moved faster than they might have otherwise. The personal loan company that had issued the $112,000 loan against my home equity was initially aggressive about recovering their money. They sent threatening letters saying they would foreclose on my house. But my lawyer, working with Sarah and the prosecutor's office, convinced them that foreclosing on a fraud victim would be terrible publicity and that they had a better chance of recovery through the criminal restitution process. They eventually agreed not to pursue my assets. During the investigation, authorities discovered something that made everything even worse, but also strengthened the case against Dana. She had done this before. 5 years ago, under her maiden name Dana Michelle Granger, she had defrauded an elderly aunt in Arizona. She had gained access to the aunt's bank accounts using a similar method, forging signatures and opening credit cards in the aunt's name. That theft had totaled around $40,000. The aunt's family had discovered what Dana had done, but they had chosen not to press charges. They had wanted to avoid family drama, so they had simply cut Dana off and demanded she never contact them again. That pattern of behavior, that history of financial fraud against family members, established Dana as a habitual offender. It showed premeditation and a complete willingness to exploit family relationships for personal gain. The prosecutor said it would significantly increase her likely sentence. Trevor also had a record that came to light. 4 years ago, he had been involved in a similar scheme with a different woman. She had been married to a wealthy businessman, and Trevor had convinced her to embezzle from her husband's company. They had planned to run away together. The scheme had fallen apart, and the woman had gone to prison for 3 years. Trevor had somehow avoided charges by claiming he had not known the money was stolen. But the pattern was clear. He was a professional con artist who targeted married women and manipulated them into stealing from their families. Knowing that Marcus and I were not just unlucky, that we had been deliberately targeted by professionals, somehow made it easier to process. We were not stupid for missing the signs. We had been up against people who did this for a living, people who had practiced and perfected their deception. 6 months later, Dana pleaded guilty to all charges in a negotiated agreement with the prosecutor. Her lawyer had advised her that going to trial would result in a much harsher sentence, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. She was sentenced to 8 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for at least 5 years. Trevor also pleaded guilty and received a 7-year sentence. Both were ordered to pay full restitution, though realistically, the money would have to be recovered through asset seizures, since neither of them had legitimate income or savings. The court seized Trevor's car, a leased BMW that he had been paying for with stolen money. They seized jewelry, designer clothes, electronics, and furniture from the apartment he had been renting. Dana's personal belongings were also seized and sold, including the designer purses and expensive jewelry that had been purchased with my money. Even her wedding ring, which turned out to be an upgrade she had bought herself without Marcus knowing, was seized because she had purchased it with fraudulent funds. All told, the seized assets and restitution agreements recovered about $160,000. It was not everything, but it was more than I had hoped for. The bank and loan company agreed to write off the remaining losses, and my credit was fully repaired. My home equity was restored, and all the fraudulent accounts were permanently closed. Marcus and the children moved in with me temporarily, while Marcus sorted out his new life. The house I had been living in alone since my wife Sarah died 5 years ago suddenly felt alive again. There were breakfast conversations about homework and soccer practice. There were sneakers by the door and backpacks on the couch. There was laughter and occasional arguments and the beautiful chaos of family life. Emma and Tyler adjusted better than I expected. Children are resilient in ways adults forget. They still asked about their mother sometimes, and Marcus always answered honestly, but gently. He never spoke with hatred about Dana, only with sadness about the choices she had made. He wanted his children to understand that their mother had done wrong things, but that did not mean she had never loved them. Tyler, now 9 years old, asked me one night during a bedtime story why his mom had stolen from me. I thought carefully about how to answer. I told him that sometimes people make very bad choices because they want things more than they value the people who love them. I told him that his mom had gotten lost in wanting a different life, and had forgotten how to appreciate the good life she already had. I told him it was very sad, but it was not his fault, or Emma's fault, or even his dad's fault. People are responsible for their own choices. Marcus struggled with guilt for a long time. Even though everyone told him he was not to blame, he kept returning to the idea that he should have seen the signs, that he should have been more present, that he should have questioned things more. He started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Angela Patterson, who specialized in trauma and betrayal. She helped him process not just what had happened, but why he kept blaming himself. She helped him understand that Dana had deliberately exploited his trust, that deception only works when someone trusts you, and that his willingness to trust was not a weakness, but a strength that Dana had abused. Marcus also joined a support group for people whose partners had committed financial crimes. He found it helpful to talk to others who understood the specific kind of betrayal he was experiencing, the way it tangled up emotional hurt with practical financial devastation, the way it made you question your own judgment about everything. Slowly, painfully, Marcus began to heal. He started sleeping better. He smiled more easily. He began to make plans for the future instead of just surviving the present. He talked about eventually buying a small house near mine, so the kids could walk back and forth between our homes easily. He talked about maybe, someday, when he was ready, trying to date again, though he admitted the idea terrified him. I returned to my regular routine of weekly card games with Calvin and our group of retired teachers. The first time I showed up after everything had happened, they all wanted to hear the full story. I told them, and when I finished, my friend Howard asked how I had stayed so calm through everything. I said I had learned something important over the years. When something terrible happens, you have two choices. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it show you what you are made of. I chose to protect my family. I chose to act instead of freezing in panic or denial. And I learned that my son was even stronger than I had known, that he could survive something that would have broken many people. But mostly, I said, I learned that family is not just about blood or marriage certificates. Family is about who shows up when everything falls apart. Marcus showed up for his children, even when his world was ending. I showed up for Marcus. Calvin showed up for both of us. That is family. 9 months after Dana went to prison, Marcus bought a small 3-bedroom house 4 blocks from mine. It needed work, but it had a big backyard for the kids and a garage where Marcus could keep his woodworking tools, a hobby he had given up during his marriage because Dana had always complained about the noise and mess. Emma and Tyler helped paint their new bedrooms. Emma chose lavender and covered one wall with glow-in-the-dark stars. Tyler chose blue and put up posters of his favorite baseball players. They both seemed happier than they had been in a long time, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted that they had not even known they were carrying. Marcus started dating, cautiously and slowly. A woman named Julie, who worked as a physical therapist at his hospital, asked him out for coffee, and he said yes. He told me about it nervously, like he needed permission or approval. I told him he deserved happiness, that he deserved someone who would appreciate his kindness and dedication, that not everyone was like Dana. The date went well. Then there was another date, and another. Marcus was taking it slow, being careful, but he was allowing himself to hope again. That felt like progress. A year after everything happened, Tyler told me at bedtime one night that I had saved them. He said if I had not figured out what his mom was doing, everything would have been worse. He said I was a hero. I corrected him gently. I told him we had saved each other. His dad had been strong enough to face the truth even when it hurt. I had been clear-headed enough to investigate instead of panicking. Calvin had been loyal enough to help without judgment. Sarah had been professional enough to build a case that held up in court. We had all saved each other by being there when it mattered. That is what family does. I think back sometimes on that phone call from Derek, the bank manager, the moment when everything changed. I think about how my life could have gone differently. I could have ignored the signs. I could have let Dana manipulate me into staying quiet. I could have chosen peace over justice, but I did not, because I learned a long time ago that protecting people you love sometimes means doing things that are hard. Here is what I learned through all of this. The lesson I hope anyone hearing this story takes away. Betrayal teaches you who you can truly count on. When someone you trust uses that trust as a weapon against you, it is not your fault for trusting them. Trust is a gift we give. and it is supposed to be honored and protected. When someone betrays that trust, the shame belongs entirely to them, not to you. The real measure of a person is not whether they fall, but whether they get back up, and more importantly, whether they help others rise too. My son Marcus fell. His marriage shattered, his trust was destroyed, and his world came apart. But he got back up. He fought for his children. He faced the truth. He did the hard work of healing. And he is teaching his children, by example, what resilience looks like. I learned that protecting family sometimes means exposing painful truths. It would have been easier to stay quiet, to let Dana get away with it, to avoid the drama and the legal battles and the emotional devastation. But easier is not always right. Sometimes love means doing the hard thing, the painful thing, the thing that tears everything apart before it can be rebuilt stronger. I learned that the family you rebuild after betrayal can be even stronger than what was broken, because it is built on truth instead of illusions. Marcus and I are closer now than we have ever been. I know my grandchildren better now than I did before. We talk more honestly, love more intentionally, and appreciate each other more deeply, because we survived something terrible together. And I learned that my son is one of the strongest people I know. He works a job that breaks many people, he survived a betrayal that would have destroyed others, and he is raising two beautiful children to be kind and honest, despite everything they have been through. He is my hero, even though he does not see it yet. If you are going through something similar, if someone you trusted has betrayed you, please know this. It is not your fault. You are not stupid for believing someone you loved. You are not weak for being hurt. And you can survive this. You can get back up. You can rebuild. And the people who really love you will be there to help you do it. That is the truth I learned. And I hope it helps someone who needs to hear it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to move forward? What lessons did you learn that you would share with others going through similar pain? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like. It helps others who might need this message find it. And if you are not already subscribed to this channel, I would be honored if you would subscribe. We share stories of real human experiences here, stories about pain and healing, and the strength we find in ourselves and each other. Please also share this story with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. Sometimes knowing that others have survived similar betrayals makes our own pain feel a little less isolating. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was not easy to hear at times, but I believe in the power of shared experiences, in the way our stories can help each other heal and grow. I wish you peace, strength, and the courage to face whatever challenges you are navigating. Remember that you are stronger than you know, and you are never as alone as you might feel. Take care of yourselves and each other.